I think I didn't do anything wrong, just made a little joke about our baby looking like his best friend. Everyone laughed, but now there's an envelope on the kitchen table with my name and the words legal notice on the front. I never thought a joke would end with my husband starting a custody case. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The dining room felt smaller than usual that Sunday evening, packed with the familiar faces of our weekly family dinner. Steam rose from the casserole dish in the center of our modest oak table, and the sound of silverware against plates filled the comfortable silence. This was supposed to be normal, routine, safe. I should have kept my mouth shut. "Look at little Rosie," I said, bouncing our 7-month-old daughter on my knee. "She's getting those same dimples as Darren, don't you think?" I laughed, glancing around the table at my husband Simon, his mother Marta, my sister Hannah, and my father Alan. "Maybe I should get a DNA test to make sure she's not his." The words hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Hannah giggled nervously, covering her mouth with her napkin. Dad looked down at his plate, suddenly very interested in his green beans. But it was Simon's face that made my stomach drop. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and those deep brown eyes I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago went completely cold. "That's not funny, Eulalia," he said quietly, setting his fork down with deliberate precision. "Oh, come on," I said, forcing another laugh. "It's just a joke. Everyone says babies look like random people. Remember when your mom said Rosie looked like the mailman?" Marta Vane, all 62 years of her, straightened in her chair like a rod of steel. "I never said any such thing." Her voice carried that crisp authority she'd developed during 30 years as a nurse. "And I don't appreciate you putting words in my mouth." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rosie must have sensed it too, because she started fussing, her little fists waving in the air. I bounced her more vigorously, trying to recapture the lightness of moments before. "Simon, you're being paranoid," I said, aiming for playful but landing somewhere closer to defensive. "You need to lighten up. It's just that Darren has those same dimples, and you know how people always say babies look like." "I know what people say." Simon's voice was flat, emotionless. He pushed back from the table slightly, creating distance. "But my wife doesn't usually joke about paternity tests." Hannah jumped in, probably trying to help. "Oh, Simon, she didn't mean anything by it. Eulalia's always been a jokester. Remember when she convinced me that Dad was secretly a spy because he read the newspaper so thoroughly?" But her attempt at levity fell flat. Dad finally looked up from his plate, his weathered face creased with concern. "Maybe we should talk about something else," he suggested gently. "Yes, let's," Marta said, her tone suggesting this was more command than request. "How's work going, Simon?" My husband picked up his fork again, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. "Fine, busy season's coming up." He was an accountant at a small firm downtown, methodical and reliable in everything he did. Those same qualities that had attracted me to him now felt suffocating. The conversation limped along for another 20 minutes, covering safe topics like the weather and Rosie's developmental milestones. But I could feel Simon watching me, analyzing every word, every gesture. When I excused myself to change Rosie's diaper, I caught him staring at my phone, which I'd left face down beside my plate. After everyone left, Simon disappeared into his home office without a word. I could hear the clicking of his keyboard through the thin wall as I cleaned up the dinner dishes. The sound felt accusatory somehow, like he was documenting something. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Darren's name. Before I could think too hard about it, I sent him a meme I'd saved earlier, a cartoon of a confused-looking baby with the caption, "When you're not sure which parent you got your looks from." I added a laughing emoji and hit send. The response came back within minutes. "LOL, that's hilarious. Your family dinner go okay?" I was typing back when I felt eyes on me. Simon stood in the kitchen doorway, his face unreadable in the dim light from the stove hood. How long had he been standing there? "Just sending Hannah a funny picture," I said quickly, sliding the phone into my back pocket. He nodded slowly, but something in his expression made my skin crawl. "I'm going to bed early tonight. Long day tomorrow." "Okay," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'll be up in a few minutes." But when I finally made it upstairs an hour later, Simon was lying on his side, facing away from me, his breathing too controlled to be natural sleep. I slipped under the covers and stared at the ceiling, wondering why a simple joke had created such a chasm between us. Outside, a car door slammed, and I thought about Darren's text. He'd asked about dinner, which meant he was thinking about me, about us, about the conversations we'd been having lately. The one Simon didn't know about. Maybe my joke hadn't been so innocent after all. The dental clinic where I worked as a receptionist had always been a refuge from domestic tension. Dr. Peterson ran a calm, efficient practice, and my co-workers were the kind of people who minded their own business. At least, that's what I'd always thought. Tuesday morning started normally enough. I was updating patient files when Lisa, one of the dental hygienists, poked her head around the corner of my desk. "Hey, Eulalia," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're about to share gossip. "Weird question, but does your friend Darren drive a blue pickup truck?" My fingers froze over the keyboard. "Why?" "I could have sworn I saw it parked in your driveway yesterday when I drove past your neighborhood. My mom lives on Elm Street, just a couple blocks from you." Lisa's smile was innocent enough, but there was curiosity in her eyes. "I thought Simon drove that little Honda." "Oh, that," I said, forcing my voice to stay light. "Darren was helping us move some furniture from the garage. Simon's back has been bothering him lately." It wasn't entirely a lie. Darren had been over on Monday, though furniture moving hadn't been involved. We'd spent an hour talking on the front porch while Rosie napped, the kind of easy conversation that had become increasingly rare with Simon. Darren had a way of making me feel interesting, appreciated, like the person I used to be before marriage and motherhood had worn me down to someone who made awkward jokes at family dinners. "That's nice of him," Lisa said. "It's great when friends help out like that." "Yeah," I agreed, turning back to my computer screen. Simon's lucky to have such a good friend. But Lisa lingered, adjusting the stack of patient charts in her arms. "How long have they been friends? Darren and Simon, I mean." "Since college," I said, wondering why she was so interested. "They were roommates freshman year." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "He seems really friendly. I've seen him at the gym where my husband works out. Always chatting with people, you know. Very social." There was something in her tone that made me look up from the screen. "Is there something you're trying to say, Lisa?" "Oh, no," she backpedaled quickly. "I just meant he seems like a nice guy, easy to talk to." After she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation had been more loaded than it appeared. I'd been careful about my interactions with Darren, or at least I thought I had. We texted regularly, but nothing inappropriate. We met for coffee occasionally, but always in public places. If Simon was distant and preoccupied with work, was it wrong to seek friendship elsewhere? At lunch, Hannah stopped by with sandwiches from the deli down the street. My younger sister had always been my closest confidant, the one person who understood the pressures I was under. "You look stressed," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Still weird vibes with Simon after Sunday?" "He's been acting strange all week," I admitted. "Barely talking to me, spending hours in his office with the door closed. I think he's actually upset about that stupid joke I made." Hannah unwrapped her turkey sandwich thoughtfully. "Maybe you should apologize. I mean, I know you were kidding, but it probably wasn't the best timing." "Apologize for what? Having a sense of humor?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Simon's been so serious lately, so focused on work and bills and all the boring adult stuff. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a robot. That's not fair, Eulalia. He's working hard to provide for you and Rosie. I work too, I said defensively, and I take care of the baby and manage the household. But I'm not allowed to make jokes or have friends or do anything that might upset his precious routine. Hannah was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Is this really about Simon being too serious? Or is there something else going on? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could tell her about Darren, about the conversations and the connection I'd been missing in my marriage. Hannah would understand. She'd always been on my side. Simon's been neglectful, I said finally. He comes home, eats dinner, disappears into his office, and goes to bed. We barely talk anymore unless it's about practical stuff. When's the last time he asked how my day was? When's the last time he really listened to my answer? So you've been talking to someone who does listen. The question was gentle, but it hit like a slap. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, Hannah said quickly. You seem different lately. Happier in some ways, but also more defensive about Simon. I'm worried about you. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and saw Darren's name. Hope you're having a good day. Thinking about our conversation yesterday. I slipped the phone back into my purse without responding, but Hannah had seen enough. Eulalia, she said quietly, please tell me you're not doing something stupid. I'm not doing anything, I said, which was technically true. Talking wasn't doing. Feeling appreciated wasn't doing. Enjoying someone's company wasn't doing. Good, Hannah said, but she didn't look convinced. Because Simon's a good guy, and Rosie needs her parents to work things out. After Hannah left, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting. At 3:00, I went to my locker to grab my jacket for the walk to my car. Tucked behind my purse was a small piece of paper I hadn't noticed before. The handwriting was unfamiliar, printed in block letters. Maybe secrets aren't safe. I stared at the note, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who had access to the employee break room? How long had this been here? I looked around, but the area was empty except for the hum of the refrigerator. Someone knew something, but what exactly did they know? And more importantly, what were they planning to do about it? I crumpled the note and shoved it deep into my purse, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully maintained balance was starting to crumble. Saturday afternoon at Brewster's Cafe should have been peaceful. The little coffee shop on Main Street was our usual neutral ground for family meetings, with its warm lighting and the constant hum of conversation providing a buffer for difficult discussions. But as I sat across from Simon, with Marta, Hannah, and Dad arranged around our corner table like a tribunal, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual family gathering. Rosie gurgled happily in her carrier beside my chair, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. Simon had barely looked at me since we'd arrived, instead focusing his attention on stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. So, Dad said, clearly trying to break the ice, how's everyone's week been? Interesting, Simon said, finally looking up. His eyes met mine across the table. I've been doing some thinking about trust, about marriage, about the importance of honesty in a relationship. My stomach clenched. That sounds very philosophical. Does it? Simon's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. I've been wondering about some practical things too, like why Darren's truck was parked in our driveway Monday afternoon when I was supposedly at work. The cafe noise seemed to fade into the background. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for an explanation. I told you he was helping with some things around the house. What things exactly? I don't remember every detail, Simon. Some boxes in the garage, maybe organizing the storage closet. The lies came easier than they should have. Is there something wrong with having friends help out? Marta set down her teacup with a sharp clink. There might be, depending on the nature of the help. What's that supposed to mean? I turned to face my mother-in-law, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. It means, Simon said, pulling out his phone, that I've been paying attention to some inconsistencies, Like this. He slid the phone across the table. On the screen was a photo of a receipt from Brewster's Cafe, this very cafe dated 3 days ago. 2 coffee orders, 2 pastries, charged to my credit card at 11:30 a.m. on a day when I'd told Simon I was working a double shift at the clinic. "I don't understand," I said, though my mouth had gone dry. "What is this?" "It's a receipt from our joint account statement," Simon said. "From Wednesday, when you said you couldn't meet me for lunch because you were too busy at work. But apparently you weren't too busy to have coffee with someone else." Hannah leaned forward, her face creased with concern. "Eulalia, who were you having coffee with?" The question felt like a trap. I could lie, say I'd met a girlfriend or taken a break between appointments. But Simon was watching me with the same methodical attention he brought to balancing spreadsheets, and I had the sinking feeling that he already knew the answer. "Darren and I are friends," I said finally. "We occasionally grab coffee and talk. There's nothing wrong with that." "Friends," Simon repeated slowly. "Is that what you call it when you spend 2 hours at a cafe with my best friend while lying to me about your whereabouts?" "I wasn't lying. I was on my lunch break and we just talked longer than expected. I'm sorry I didn't mention it, but I knew you'd react exactly like this, jealous and controlling." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Hannah's eyes widened. But it was Marta who spoke first. "Controlling?" Her voice was ice cold. "My son works 60 hours a week to support his family, comes home every night, helps with the baby, and never questions where you go or what you do. That's not controlling, dear, that's trusting. Or it was." "Marta, please," Dad interjected. "Let's all stay calm." "I am calm," Marta said. "But I'm also not blind. I've watched Simon become more and more withdrawn over the past few months, and now I'm starting to understand why." "You don't understand anything," I snapped. "You see Simon as this perfect son who can do no wrong, but you don't see how he treats me at home. The silence, the distance, the way he makes me feel like I'm some kind of burden." Simon's coffee cup hit the table harder than necessary. "A burden? Eulalia, I've never once made you feel like a burden." "Haven't you? When's the last time you asked about my day? When's the last time we had a real conversation about something other than bills or schedules, or what needs to be fixed around the house? When's the last time you gave me a chance?" Simon's voice was rising now, drawing glances from other cafe patrons. "Every time I try to talk to you, you're on your phone or distracted or making jokes about how boring I am." "I never said you were boring. You didn't have to. It's in every eye roll, every sigh, every time you light up, when Darren texts you and goes silent when I walk in the room." The accuracy of the observation hit like a physical blow. I looked around the table, searching for support, but Hannah was staring at her hands, and Dad looked disappointed. Only Marta met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't sympathy. "This is ridiculous," I said, standing up and reaching for Rosie's carrier. "I'm not going to sit here and be attacked for having a friendship." "Sit down, Eulalia." Simon's voice was quiet but firm. "We're not done." "Yes, we are. I don't have to listen to—" Simon's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed. Without a word, he stood up and walked toward the cafe entrance, phone pressed to his ear. "Where's he going?" Hannah asked. I watched through the window as Simon paced back and forth on the sidewalk, his free hand gesturing as he talked to whoever had called. After 5 minutes, he came back inside, but instead of sitting down, he gathered his jacket and keys. "I have to go," he said. "We'll finish this conversation at home." "Simon, wait," Dad called, but my husband was already heading for the door. I was left at the table with 3 pairs of eyes staring at me expectantly. The silence stretched until Hannah finally spoke. "Eulalia," she said gently, "is there something you need to tell us?" Looking at their faces, Hannah's concern, Dad's disappointment, Marta's barely contained anger, I realized that my carefully constructed explanations weren't fooling anyone. But admitting the truth felt impossible, like stepping off a cliff into empty air. There's nothing to tell, I said, lifting Rosie's carrier. Simon's being paranoid, and apparently everyone's decided to take his side. I left the cafe feeling like I was walking through quicksand, each step pulling me deeper into something I couldn't control. Behind me, I could hear the low murmur of voices, and I knew they were talking about me, analyzing my behavior, reaching conclusions I wasn't ready to face. The worst part was that I couldn't shake the feeling they might be right. Coming home from the cafe felt like walking into a minefield. Simon's car was already in the driveway, but the house was eerily quiet when I carried Rosie inside. No sound of typing from his office, no television, no movement at all. "Simon," I called out, setting the baby carrier on the living room floor. "In here." His voice came from the kitchen, flat and emotionless. I found him sitting at our small breakfast table, his laptop open in front of him and papers scattered across the surface. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, our entire financial life spread out like evidence at a crime scene. "What's all this?" I asked, though my stomach was already sinking. "Research," Simon said without looking up. "I'm trying to understand some discrepancies in our accounts." I moved closer, trying to see what he was looking at, but he closed the laptop with a soft click. Discrepancies. Coffee shops, restaurants, gas stations. He picked up a highlighted bank statement. All charges on days when you said you were working or running errands. All in amounts that suggest 2 people, not 1. "Simon, you're being ridiculous. I grab coffee with coworkers all the time. Sometimes I buy lunch for Hannah when we meet up. You're reading way too much into..." "Am I?" He finally looked at me, and the pain in his eyes made me take a step back. Because I also looked at our phone records, interesting pattern of text messages and calls to Darren's number, mostly during work hours, mostly when I'm not around. My mouth went dry. "We're friends. Friends communicate." "Friends." Simon stood up slowly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "That's the second time today you've used that word, but friends don't usually delete their message history every few days. I don't delete anything. Your phone automatically deletes messages after a week. I checked your settings." His voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it that scared me. Convenient setting for someone who wants to cover their tracks. "You went through my phone?" Outrage felt safer than guilt. "How dare you? That's a complete violation of privacy." "Privacy?" Simon nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting word choice. When did we start needing privacy from each other, Eulalia?" Before I could answer, Rosie started crying from the living room. I hurried to get her, grateful for the interruption. But when I came back with her in my arms, Simon was still standing in the same spot, watching me with those analytical eyes. "I talked to Darren today," he said quietly. My heart stopped. "What?" "That phone call at the cafe. I asked him directly about his relationship with my wife." Simon's voice was getting quieter, more controlled. "Do you want to know what he said?" I bounced Rosie gently, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sure whatever he said, you misunderstood. He said you two have been meeting regularly for months. Coffee, lunch, long conversations about how unhappy you are in your marriage." Simon paused, letting that sink in. "He said you've been confiding in him about our problems, asking for advice about whether you made a mistake marrying me." "That's not... I mean, we've talked, but not like that. Not about..." I was stumbling over the words, and Simon could see it. "He also said you kissed him, last week in his car outside the gym." The world tilted sideways. I gripped Rosie tighter, using her warm weight to anchor myself. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Simon pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. Because he seemed pretty upset about it, said he felt guilty betraying our friendship, but he couldn't keep lying to me anymore. I stared at the phone, trying to process what I was seeing. A long text conversation between Simon and Darren, time-stamped from an hour ago. Darren's messages were full of apologies and explanations, admitting to the emotional affair, the physical contact, the growing feelings that had complicated everything. He's lying, I said desperately. Simon, you have to believe me. Darren is lying to cover up his own feelings. He's been pursuing me, and I've been trying to maintain appropriate boundaries. Boundaries? Simon took the phone back. Like the boundary you maintained when you told him I was neglectful and distant, or the boundary you maintained when you said you weren't sure if you still loved me. Each word hit like a physical blow. I had said those things in moments of frustration and loneliness, but hearing them repeated back in Simon's calm voice made them sound terrible, unforgivable. Simon, please, let me explain. I don't think there's anything left to explain. He walked past me toward the hallway. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we need to have a conversation about what happens next. What do you mean, what happens next? Simon stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to look at me. I mean, I need to decide whether this marriage is worth saving. And you need to decide whether you want to be married to me or to the fantasy version of me that exists in your conversations with my former best friend. Former? I told Darren our friendship was over. I also told him that if he contacts you again, we'll have a different kind of conversation. After Simon disappeared upstairs, I stood in the kitchen holding Rosie, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's investigation. The bank statements, the phone records, the timeline he'd constructed of my deception. It was all there in black and white, impossible to deny or explain away. I thought about calling Darren, but Simon had probably anticipated that. I thought about calling Hannah, but after this afternoon's cafe confrontation, I wasn't sure whose side she was on anymore. I thought about calling my father, but the disappointment in his eyes was still fresh in my memory. Instead, I put Rosie in her high chair and started making dinner, going through the motions of normal domestic life while my marriage crumbled around me. When Simon came downstairs an hour later, he ate in silence, helped clean up without being asked, and kissed Rosie goodnight before disappearing back upstairs. It wasn't until I was loading the dishwasher that I noticed something was missing from Simon's usual spot on the counter. His keys, his wallet, and the small wooden box where he kept important documents were all gone. I climbed the stairs quietly and peered into his office. The desk drawers were open, files reorganized, and his laptop bag was packed by the door. But it was what I saw in the top drawer that made my blood freeze. A DNA testing kit still in its unopened package, with a receipt dated from this morning. Simon wasn't just investigating our finances and my phone records. He was questioning everything, including whether Rosie was his daughter. The joke I'd made at Sunday dinner, the casual comment that had started this whole nightmare, was about to become a reality, and I had no one to blame but myself. The envelope appeared on our kitchen table Tuesday morning, like a bomb waiting to explode. Thick manila paper, my name typed across the front in formal letters, and those two words that made my hand shake, legal notice. Simon had already left for work, his coffee cup washed and placed in the dish drainer, with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. Rosie was in her bouncer, happily gnawing on a teething ring, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. I stared at the envelope for 10 minutes before finding the courage to open it. Inside were 3 documents, each one more devastating than the last. The first was a letter from Hartwell & Associates Family Law. Professional letterhead, formal language, but the message was crystal clear. My husband had retained legal counsel and was exploring his options regarding custody arrangements and property division. The second document was a detailed timeline of my activities over the past 4 months. Coffee shop receipts, text message logs, witness statements from co-workers who had seen Darren's truck in our driveway. Simon had been thorough, documenting every lunch meeting, every unexplained absence, every lie I'd told about my whereabouts. But it was the third document that made me sink into a kitchen chair with my heart pounding against my ribs. DNA test results. Official laboratory letterhead, case numbers, and a conclusion that should have brought relief, but somehow felt like another nail in my coffin. Probability of paternity 99.9%. Simon James Vane is the biological father of the tested child. Rosie was his daughter. The joke I'd made, the doubt I'd planted in his mind, the test he'd ordered in secret, all of it had confirmed what should have been obvious from the beginning. But instead of vindication, the results felt like evidence of how far our marriage had deteriorated. My phone rang, making me jump. Hannah's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Eulalia, we need to talk. Can I come over?" I'm not really in the mood for another intervention. This isn't an intervention. Simon called me this morning. He told me about the DNA test. The words hit like ice water. "He told you what?" "Everything. The test results, the lawyer, the custody petition he's filing." Hannah's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm coming over. We need to figure out how to fix this before it gets worse." She arrived 20 minutes later with coffee and pastries from the bakery downtown, the same peace offerings she'd brought to smooth over arguments since we were teenagers. But this felt different, more serious, like she was preparing for a difficult conversation. "Show me the papers," she said without preamble. I handed over the legal documents and watched her face change as she read through them. Hannah had always been the practical one, the sister who thought through consequences before acting, and I could see her calculating the implications of what Simon had set in motion. "Eulalia," she said finally, "this is bad, really bad." "I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been treating this whole thing like it's some kind of misunderstanding that will blow over. But Simon has hired a lawyer. He's documented evidence of an emotional affair. He's questioning the paternity of your child. The DNA test proves Rosie is his. The DNA test proves you gave him reason to doubt it." Hannah set the papers down carefully. "What were you thinking? How did you let it get this far?" The question I'd been avoiding for weeks finally demanded an answer. How had innocent conversations with Darren turned into secret meetings? How had venting about my marriage turned into emotional infidelity? How had a joke about paternity turned into legal documents? "I was lonely," I said quietly. Simon was always working, always tired, always focused on everything except me. Darren listened. He made me feel interesting, appreciated, like I was worth paying attention to. "So you had an affair?" "I didn't have an affair. We talked, we had coffee, we connected, but I never slept with him." "You kissed him." The statement hung between us like an accusation. I could deny it, the way I'd denied it to Simon, but Hannah's eyes told me she already knew the truth. "Once," I whispered. "It was just once, and it was a mistake. I told him it couldn't happen again." "But you didn't tell Simon." "How could I? It would have destroyed everything." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Rosie, who had fallen asleep in her bouncer. "Everything's destroyed anyway, Eulalia. The only difference is now Simon found out from someone else instead of from you." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Through the window, I could see a uniformed courier holding a clipboard and another official-looking envelope. "Mrs. Eulalia Vane?" he asked when I opened the door. "Yes. I have a delivery that requires your signature." My hands shook as I signed the electronic pad and accepted the envelope. The return address was the same law firm, but this document was different. Thicker, more official, with multiple pages and legal seals. Hannah read over my shoulder as I opened it. "Petition for legal separation and custody arrangement," she read aloud. "Oh, Eulalia." The document was comprehensive and devastating. Simon was requesting legal separation with primary custody of Rosie, citing evidence of adultery and emotional abandonment. He was asking for supervised visitation rights for me, pending a full custody evaluation. He was requesting division of assets and spousal support calculations. But the part that made my knees weak was the witness list. Darren Cole, who would testify about the nature of our relationship. Lisa Martinez from the dental clinic, who had observed his truck at my house. Marta Vane, who would speak to my character and fitness as a parent. He's been planning this for weeks, I said, sinking onto the couch. While I thought we were just going through a rough patch, he was building a case against me. Can you blame him? Hannah's voice was sharper than usual. You lied to him for months. You had an emotional affair with his best friend. You made him doubt whether his own daughter was really his. Whose side are you on? I'm on the side of truth, Hannah said, and the truth is that you screwed up, badly. The question now is what you're going to do about it. I looked at the legal documents spread across my coffee table, at my sleeping daughter, at my sister's disappointed face. 6 months ago, I'd been a wife and mother with normal problems, a husband who worked too much, a baby who didn't sleep through the night, the ordinary challenges of adult life. Now I was facing the possibility of losing everything I'd taken for granted. What can I do? I asked. Simon won't talk to me. Darren's probably going to testify against me. Even you think I'm in the wrong. I think you made terrible choices, Hannah corrected, but you're still my sister, and Rosie needs her mother. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to call that law firm and schedule a meeting. You're going to be completely honest with your lawyer about what happened, and you're going to fight for your family. What if it's too late? Hannah gathered up the legal papers and handed them back to me. Then at least you'll know you tried. But, Eulalia, if you get a second chance, if Simon gives you an opportunity to fix this, you better not waste it. After she left, I sat alone with the documents and the weight of my choices. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of suburban life, lawnmowers, children playing, dogs barking. But inside my house, everything felt suspended, like I was waiting for a verdict that had already been decided. The legal notice was just the beginning. The real reckoning was still to come. The final confrontation came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the legal papers arrived. Simon had been methodical in his preparations, just as he was methodical about everything else. He'd arranged for Marta to pick up Rosie for an overnight visit. He'd packed his essential belongings into boxes that now sat stacked by the front door. He'd even prepared a folder with copies of all the legal documents, custody arrangements, and financial agreements we'd need to discuss. I found him in the living room, sitting in the armchair that had been his father's, wearing the same calm expression he'd maintained throughout this entire nightmare. We need to talk, he said simply. Simon, please. Before you say anything, let me explain. I don't need explanations anymore, Eulalia. I need decisions. He opened the folder and pulled out a document I hadn't seen before. A custody agreement, already drafted, with specific visitation schedules and support arrangements. I'm moving out this weekend, he said. I found a 2-bedroom apartment across town, close enough that Rosie can maintain her routine, but far enough that we won't accidentally run into each other at the grocery store. You can't just leave. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. Can we? Simon's voice was tired, defeated. Can you honestly tell me you want to be married to me? Not the idea of being married, not the security or the convenience, but actually married to me. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I opened my mouth to say yes, of course, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was complicated, messy, full of conditions and qualifications that had no place in a marriage. I thought so, Simon said quietly. You want to be married to someone who makes you feel the way Darren made you feel. Someone exciting, spontaneous, who makes you laugh and tells you you're amazing. But that's not who I am, Eulalia. I'm the guy who pays the bills on time and remembers to change the oil in your car and gets up with the baby at night so you can sleep. Those things matter too. Do they? Because for months you've been telling anyone who would listen that I'm boring, neglectful, emotionally distant. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am those things. But I'm also loyal and honest, and I've never once looked at another woman the way you looked at my best friend. The accuracy of his words hit like physical blows. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain the loneliness and frustration that had driven me to seek connection elsewhere. But Simon wasn't finished. "I loved you," he said, using the past tense like a door slamming shut. "I loved your laugh, your energy, the way you could find something funny in any situation. But somewhere along the way, you decided that wasn't enough. You decided I wasn't enough." "That's not true, isn't it?" Simon pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. "These are text messages between you and Darren. He sent me screenshots after I confronted him." He handed me the phone, and I saw my own words reflected back at me in devastating clarity. Complaints about Simon's boring routine, jokes about his lack of spontaneity, speculation about whether I'd married the wrong person, comments about feeling trapped, unappreciated, taken for granted. "I was venting," I said weakly. "Everyone complains about their spouse sometimes. To their friends maybe, to their sisters, not to someone they're having an emotional affair with." Simon took the phone back. "Not to someone they're kissing in parking lots while their husband is at work. It was one kiss, one mistake. It was months of deception, months of lies, months of you checking out of our marriage while I was trying to figure out what I'd done wrong." I sank onto the couch, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd destroyed. It wasn't just about Darren, or the kiss, or even the lies. It was about the fundamental disrespect I'd shown for my marriage, my husband, and the life we'd built together. "What happens now?" I asked. Simon handed me the custody agreement. "You get Rosie every other weekend and one evening per week. I'll pay for her health insurance and daycare. We'll split holidays. When she's older, if she wants to spend more time with you, we can revisit the arrangement." "Every other weekend? Simon, she's my daughter." "She's our daughter, but I'm the parent who's been putting her needs first." His voice was steady, factual. "I'm the one who gets up for night feedings while you're texting Darren. I'm the one who takes her to doctor appointments while you're having secret coffee dates. I'm the one who's been present." The truth of it was undeniable. Even before the affair, I'd been the parent who handed Rosie off when she got fussy, who found excuses to run errands alone, who treated childcare like a burden to be shared rather than a joy to be embraced. "I can change," I said desperately. "I can be better. I can be the wife and mother you need me to be." Simon was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "The problem is, I don't want you to change for me. I want you to be happy, Eulalia. Really happy. And I don't think you can be happy with someone like me." "Don't tell me what makes me happy." "Then tell me yourself. Honestly, what makes you happy?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words that came to mind weren't about Simon, or our marriage, or the family we'd built. They were about feeling desired, appreciated, exciting. They were about the thrill of secret conversations and stolen moments. They were about being someone other than a wife and mother in a modest suburban house. Simon saw the realization cross my face. "I thought so." He stood up and gathered his folder, preparing to leave. But I wasn't ready to let him go. Wasn't ready to accept that this was really the end. "What about Darren?" I asked. "Are you going to tell me I can't see him anymore?" Simon paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "Darren moved to Phoenix last week. New job, fresh start. He said he couldn't stay in town after what happened." The news hit like a slap. Darren was gone, had left without even saying goodbye, had abandoned me to face the consequences of our choices alone. He didn't tell me. Why would he? You were never his priority, Eulalia. You were just his escape from his own problems. Simon's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Just like he was yours. After Simon left, I sat alone in the house that would soon be too expensive for me to maintain on my receptionist's salary. The silence was complete, broken only by the tick of the wall clock and the distant sound of traffic. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my heart leaped, thinking it might be Simon reconsidering, or even Darren explaining his departure. But it was just a notification from the bank about a low balance in our checking account. I walked through the empty rooms, seeing them as if for the first time. The kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, the living room where we'd watched movies and argued about the remote control, the bedroom where we'd made love and made plans, and made the daughter who would now shuttle between two homes. In Simon's office, I found one last thing he'd left behind. A framed photo of our wedding day, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. I looked young and radiant in my white dress, and Simon looked at me like I was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. That woman in the photo felt like a stranger now. She'd had no idea what she was promising when she said, for better or worse. She'd never imagined that the worst would come from her own choices, her own betrayals, her own inability to appreciate what she had until it was gone. 6 months later, the divorce was final. I moved into a small apartment across town and started over with weekend visits and every other holiday arrangements. Simon was cordial, but distant during custody exchanges, treating me like a co-parent rather than someone he'd once loved. I never heard from Darren again. Sometimes, late at night in my quiet apartment, I wondered what would have happened if I'd made different choices, if I'd talked to Simon about my loneliness instead of seeking comfort elsewhere, if I'd appreciated his steady reliability instead of craving excitement, if I'd remembered that marriage was about building something together, not about what someone else could give me. But those were questions without answers, regrets without remedies. I'd made my choices, and now I was living with the consequences. The joke I'd made about our baby looking like his best friend had cost me everything. And in the end, I was the only one who wasn't laughing.